Have you ever wondered what happens when a pizza delivery driver knocks on your door? What they see, what they experience during those brief moments on your doorstep. What secrets hide behind the doors they visit every single night? Tonight, I'm going to tell you the story of Tom Richardson, a 28-year-old pizza delivery driver whose routine food delivery turned into a supernatural nightmare that would forever change his understanding of what lurks behind closed doors. This isn't just another ghost story. This is about a young man trapped between financial desperation and supernatural terror, forced to choose between his safety and his survival. It's about the moment when standing up for yourself becomes more important than any paycheck, no matter how desperately you need it. Tom's story will take you into the dark world of late-night food delivery, where drivers navigate not just empty streets and suspicious neighborhoods, but encounters with entities that should not exist. You'll witness how economic pressure can force someone to walk repeatedly into danger, how desperation can blind us to obvious warnings, and how sometimes the most terrifying traps are disguised as the most ordinary transactions. By the end of Tom's story, you'll never look at food delivery the same way again. You'll understand that sometimes the most horrifying encounters happen not in abandoned houses or dark forests, but at addresses that look perfectly normal, behind doors that open to reveal something far more sinister than any human customer. And you'll learn that when evil forces try to trap you, when supernatural entities attempt to feed on your fear and desperation, there are guardians watching over us, mysterious figures who appear in our darkest moments to show us that we have more power than we realize, and that no job is worth sacrificing our soul. So settle in, turn off the lights, and let me tell you about the night Tom Richardson discovered that some deliveries should never be made. Tom Richardson had never imagined that at 28 years old, he'd still be delivering pizzas for a living. With a bachelor's degree in marketing that seemed increasingly worthless with each passing month, he found himself trapped in the gig economy, working for Gino's Pizza Palace on the south side of Milwaukee. It wasn't supposed to be permanent. After graduating 2 years ago, Tom had sent out hundreds of applications, attended dozens of interviews, and received an equal number of rejection letters. We'll keep your resume on file. We decided to go with someone with more experience. We're looking for someone who's a better fit for our company culture. The student loan payments were $847 a month. His rent for the tiny studio apartment was $650. Car insurance, phone bill, groceries. It all added up faster than his delivery tips could cover. Tom had learned to live on instant noodles and hope, stretching every dollar until it screamed. Gino's Pizza Palace wasn't the worst job he'd had, but it wasn't far from it. The owner, Frank Castellano, was a perpetually stressed man in his 50s who treated his employees like replaceable parts in a machine that only existed to generate profit. The pay was $8.50 an hour plus tips, and on good nights, Tom might make $120. On bad nights, barely enough to cover gas. But Tom was desperate. He'd been behind on rent twice in the last 3 months, and his landlord, Mrs. Chen, had made it clear that one more late payment would mean eviction. The job market hadn't improved, and his savings account had been empty for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to have a financial cushion. The work itself was mind-numbing. Load the thermal bags, check the address, drive through Milwaukee's increasingly dangerous neighborhoods, knock on doors, exchange food for money, repeat. He'd been robbed twice in the past year, once at gunpoint, once by 3 teenagers with baseball bats who took his entire cash bag and left him with a black eye and a twisted ankle. Tom had developed a sixth sense about dangerous deliveries. Certain addresses, certain neighborhoods, certain times of night, when his instincts screamed at him to turn around and drive away. But Frank's policy was clear. Every delivery gets made, no matter what. Refuse a delivery, lose your job. In an economy where jobs were scarce and bills were constant, Tom couldn't afford to lose this one. He'd been working at Gino's for 8 months when 1247 Elm Street first appeared on his delivery list. It was a Tuesday night in late October when Tom first encountered the address that changed his life. The order had come in around 11:30 p.m. 1 large pepperoni pizza and a 2-liter of Coke, totaling $18.47. The customer had paid online with a credit card, including a surprisingly generous $8 tip. Tom remembered thinking that was unusual. Most late-night orders were cash transactions, often from people who were drunk, high, or both. Online orders with substantial tips typically came from suburban families or college students, not from the aging Victorian houses in the Riverside district, where 1247 Elm Street was located. The GPS led him through increasingly narrow streets lined with houses that had seen better decades. Many were divided into apartments, with multiple mailboxes clustered at the entrance and cars parked haphazardly in what used to be front yards. But 1247 Elm Street stood apart. It was a 3-story Victorian house that looked like it had been abandoned for years, yet somehow maintained. The paint was faded but not peeling. The windows were intact but covered with heavy curtains, and the yard was overgrown but not completely wild. A single porch light cast a weak yellow glow over the front steps, flickering occasionally as if the electrical system was struggling. Tom parked on the street and grabbed the thermal bag containing the pizza. As he walked up the cracked sidewalk, he felt the temperature drop noticeably. Wisconsin in October was already cold, but this was different, a bone-deep chill that seemed to emanate from the house itself. The front porch creaked under his feet as he approached the door. There was no doorbell that he could see, just a heavy brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. As Tom raised his hand to knock, he noticed something odd about the windows on either side of the door. The curtains were moving slightly, as if someone was watching from inside, but there was no light visible behind them. He knocked 3 times, the sound echoing hollowly as if the house were much larger inside than it appeared from the street. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, from somewhere deep within the house, he heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps that seemed to be descending stairs. The footsteps grew closer, but they didn't sound right. There was a dragging quality to them, as if the person walking was injured or carrying something heavy. Tom felt his delivery instincts kick in, the same instincts that had kept him safe in dangerous neighborhoods. Something felt off. The door opened just a crack, and Tom caught a glimpse of wrinkled fingers wrapped around the edge. He couldn't see the customer clearly, only shadows and the suggestion of someone very old and frail. "Pizza delivery," Tom said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Large pepperoni and a Coke." "Oh, how wonderful, dear," came a voice from behind the door. It sounded like an elderly woman, but something about the tone made Tom's skin crawl. "Could you just set it inside on the hall table? My arthritis is acting up something terrible tonight." Tom felt every instinct telling him not to enter, but he thought about Frank's rules and his overdue bills. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can only leave it here on the porch." There was a pause and then a sigh that sounded more like wind through dead leaves than human breath. "Of course, dear. Just leave it there." The door opened wider, and Tom could smell something strange. Not exactly decay, but like flowers that had been left in water too long. He set the pizza box and soda on a small wicker table beside the door. "Thank you so much," the voice said. And now Tom was certain the speaker was standing much further back in the hallway than she should be. "You're very kind. I'm sure we'll see each other again soon. As Tom walked back to his car, he felt eyes watching him from every window of the house. When he glanced back from the street, he could swear he saw a pale face pressed against the glass of the second-floor window. But when he looked again, there was nothing. The drive back to Gino's was uneventful, but Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something had been fundamentally wrong about that delivery. The customer's voice, the way the house felt, the smell, it all stayed with him. 3 nights later, another order came in from 1247 Elm Street. Same order, large pepperoni pizza, and a 2-liter of Coke. Same generous tip. Tom felt his stomach clench when he saw the address print out. "Frank, can someone else take this one?" Tom asked. But his boss was already in a foul mood from a customer complaint about a cold pizza. "You know that address? You take that address," Frank snapped. "I don't have time for your preferences tonight." The house looked exactly the same as it had 3 nights earlier, but this time Tom noticed details he'd missed before. The front yard wasn't just overgrown. The grass and weeds seemed to be growing in strange spiral patterns. The paint on the shutters was peeling in a way that looked almost like claw marks. And the porch light, which had been flickering before, was now casting shadows that didn't match the objects creating them. Tom approached the door with growing dread, the thermal bag feeling heavier with each step. As he raised his hand to knock, he heard something that made his blood run cold. The sound of multiple voices talking inside the house. But they all seemed to be the same voice, having a conversation with itself. He knocked anyway. The voices stopped immediately, and the same dragging footsteps approached the door. "Oh, it's my dear pizza boy again," came the familiar voice when the door cracked open. "How lovely. I was just thinking about you." This time, Tom could see a bit more of the woman behind the door. She was very old, wearing what looked like a Victorian-era dress, and her skin had an odd, waxy quality that reminded him of the mannequins in antique shops. "Pizza delivery," Tom said, his voice coming out as barely more than a whisper. "You know, dear, I've been having such trouble with my legs since your last visit," the woman said. "Would you mind terribly bringing it inside?" Just to the kitchen table. Every fiber of Tom's being screamed at him to refuse, to leave the pizza and run. But he thought about his rent, about Mrs. Chen's warning, about the job market that had been so cruel to him. I really shouldn't enter customers' homes," he said weakly. "Oh, but you're such a sweet boy," the voice continued, and the door opened wider. "I can see you have a good heart. Surely you wouldn't leave a poor old woman to struggle." Against his better judgment, Tom stepped across the threshold. The moment he entered the house, everything changed. The temperature dropped so suddenly that his breath became visible, and the air itself seemed to thicken around him. The hallway stretched much further than it should have, given the size of the house from outside, and the walls were covered with old photographs, dozens of them, all showing people in Victorian clothing, and all with their eyes scratched out. Tom's phone, which had been fully charged, died instantly. The only light came from candles that seemed to appear from nowhere, casting dancing shadows that moved independently of the flames. "Just down the hall, dear," the woman's voice called. But now it seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once. "The kitchen is waiting for you." As Tom walked down the hallway, the photographs on the walls began to whisper. He couldn't make out the words, but the sound was like static filled with malice. The floorboards creaked not just under his feet, but in other parts of the house, as if invisible people were walking around upstairs and in the rooms beside him. The kitchen, when he finally reached it, was like something from a different century. No modern appliances, no electric lights, just old wooden furniture, and shelves lined with glass jars containing things that might once have been food but now looked like specimens in a mad scientist's laboratory. As Tom set the pizza box on the wooden table, he heard breathing behind him. Slow, labored breathing that didn't sound quite human. When he turned around, the woman was there, but she was different now. She was still wearing the Victorian dress, but it was torn and stained with dark substances. Her skin was gray and seemed to be sagging off her bones. Her eyes were completely black, reflecting the candlelight like obsidian marbles. And when she smiled, Tom could see that her teeth were sharp and numerous, like a shark's. "Thank you so much for coming inside, dear," she said, her voice now clearly coming from the wrong direction. From above him, as if she were speaking from the ceiling. "You have no idea how hungry I've been." The room began to spin around Tom, and he could hear more voices now. Dozens of them all whispering his name. The candles flickered, and in the changing light, he could see other figures standing in the doorway behind the woman. Pale, emaciated figures in old-fashioned clothes, all with the same black eyes and sharp teeth. Tom ran. He sprinted back down the hallway as the whispers turned to shrieks. The photographs on the walls turned to follow his movement, their scratched-out eyes somehow tracking him. Behind him, he could hear the sound of multiple sets of footsteps pursuing him, along with laughter that sounded like breaking glass. The front door was locked, but Tom threw his shoulder against it with such force that the lock snapped. He burst out onto the porch and didn't stop running until he reached his car, his hands shaking so violently he could barely get the key in the ignition. The car started on the fourth try, and Tom drove away from 1247 Elm Street with his heart pounding and sweat pouring down his face, despite the October cold. When Tom returned to Gino's Pizza Palace, Frank was waiting with his arms crossed and a customer complaint form in his hand. "Richardson, what the hell happened out there?" Frank demanded. "Mrs. Holloway called 20 minutes ago, screaming about you running out of her house like a maniac. She says you threw the pizza at her and called her a demon." "I never called her anything," Tom said, his voice still shaking. "Frank, there's something seriously wrong with that house. I'm not going back there." Frank's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. I'm not making any more deliveries to 1247 Elm Street. That place isn't normal. The customer isn't normal. Something evil is happening there." "Evil?" Frank laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Richardson, you've been watching too many horror movies. That's a sweet old lady who tips well and pays online. She's been ordering from us for over 2 years." "2 years?" Tom felt his blood run cold. "Frank, how is that possible? The house looks like it's been abandoned for decades." "I don't give a shit what the house looks like," Frank snapped. "I care about customer service and profit margins. Mrs. Holloway is threatening to call corporate and file a complaint with the Better Business Bureau. Do you know what that could do to us?" Tom shook his head firmly. "I don't care. I won't go back there. Send someone else." Frank stepped closer, and Tom could smell cigarettes and garlic on his breath. "Listen to me very carefully, college boy. You will take whatever deliveries I give you to whatever addresses I send you to, or you will find another job. And good fucking luck with that in this economy." "Frank, please." "No pleases. You've got one chance to make this right. Tomorrow night, you're going back to 1247 Elm Street with an apology and a free pizza. You're going to smile, deliver the food properly, and convince Mrs. Holloway not to destroy our reputation. If you refuse, you're fired." Tom thought about his rent, his student loans, his empty refrigerator. He thought about the months of job applications that had led to nothing but rejection. He thought about Mrs. Chen's threat of eviction. "What if I can't?" Tom asked quietly. "What if something happens to me in that house?" Frank shrugged. "Then I'll find another driver. There are plenty of desperate college graduates who need work. The next night, Tom sat in his car outside 1247 Elm Street for 20 minutes, staring at the house and trying to summon the courage to approach. The free pizza sat in the passenger seat, growing cold while Tom's hands shook on the steering wheel. He thought about calling in sick, about just driving away and never coming back to Gino's. But where would he go? What would he do? His bank account had $73 in it, and rent was due in 5 days. Finally, with a feeling like he was walking to his own execution, Tom grabbed the pizza and approached the house. The front yard looked worse than before. The strange spiral patterns in the grass had grown more pronounced, and some of the plants looked like they were moving slightly, even though there was no wind. The porch light was strobing now, casting rapid, seizure-inducing flashes of yellow light across the front of the house. As Tom stepped onto the porch, the floorboards didn't just creak. They seemed to pulse under his feet, like he was walking on something alive. The brass knocker felt ice cold against his knuckles as he knocked 3 times. This time, the door opened immediately, as if someone had been waiting right behind it. "My dear pizza boy," came the familiar voice, but now Tom could hear the true nature of it, the hollow, echoing quality that suggested it wasn't coming from human vocal cords. "I was beginning to think you weren't coming. I have your pizza," Tom stammered, holding out the box. "And I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I wasn't feeling well." "Oh, don't worry about that, dear," the voice said, and the door opened wider. "These things happen, but I'm afraid I can't reach the door tonight. My condition has worsened considerably. You'll need to bring it inside." "I really can't," Tom started to say, but then he felt something that made his words die in his throat. Invisible hands were grasping his arms, pulling him gently but irresistibly toward the open doorway. Tom tried to step back, tried to resist, but the grip was too strong. He was being drawn into the house against his will. "Don't fight it, dear," the voice said, and Tom could hear amusement in it now. "You've been such a good boy coming back to see me. It would be rude to leave without delivering the pizza properly." Tom tried to scream, but no sound came out. The invisible hands pulled him across the threshold, and the moment he entered the house, the door slammed shut behind him with a sound like a gunshot. The hallway was even worse than before. The photographs on the walls were moving now, the figures in them gesturing and pointing at Tom as he was dragged past. The whispers had become a chorus of voices, all saying his name over and over again. "Tom. Tom." The invisible hands released him in the kitchen, and Tom stumbled forward, still clutching the pizza box. The room was exactly as he remembered it, but now he could see more details in the candlelight. The jars on the shelves contained not just food, but other things. Teeth, hair, what looked like small bones. On the table beside where Tom stood was a collection of driver's licenses and credit cards, all belonging to different people. "You can set that down now, dear," came the voice, and Tom turned to see the woman, or what had once been a woman, standing in the doorway. She looked even less human than before. Her gray skin was hanging in loose folds, revealing glimpses of something dark and wet underneath. Her black eyes had multiplied, and now there were 3 of them arranged in a triangle on her face. Her mouth had stretched wider, revealing not just sharp teeth, but multiple rows of them like a deep-sea predator. "You've been so helpful," she said, her voice now clearly coming from somewhere else in the house. "All of you have been so helpful." Behind her, Tom could see other figures crowding the hallway, the pale, emaciated forms he'd glimpsed before. But now he could see that they were wearing the uniforms of various delivery services. Pizza drivers, Chinese food delivery, grocery store employees, all with the same vacant, black-eyed stares. "We're always hungry here," The thing that called itself Mrs. Holloway continued. And there are always more hungry people willing to work dangerous jobs for just enough money to survive. It's a perfect arrangement. Tom tried to run, but his legs wouldn't obey him. The invisible hands were holding him again, keeping him in place while the creature approached. "Don't worry, dear," she said, reaching out with fingers that were now more like claws. "You won't feel the fear much longer. Soon you'll be just like the others, content, obedient, and so very, very hungry." The claws touched Tom's face, and he felt a cold deeper than winter spreading through his body. His vision began to dim, and he could feel his will, his sense of self, starting to drain away like water through a broken dam. But just as Tom felt himself beginning to surrender to the darkness, just as he was about to join the collection of enslaved delivery drivers in the hallway, he heard something that gave him one last spark of hope. The sound of rain against the windows and footsteps on the front porch. But the footsteps Tom heard weren't rescue. They were Frank Castellano's steel-toed work boots as he burst through the front door of 1247 Elm Street. "Richardson!" Frank's voice boomed through the house. "Where the hell are you?" "Mrs. Holloway called the restaurant, screaming that you were in her house performing some kind of satanic ritual." The invisible hands released Tom so suddenly that he collapsed to his knees on the kitchen floor. The creature that had been about to drain his life force stepped back, her multiple black eyes reflecting confusion and anger. "Who is this?" she hissed, her voice now clearly coming from 3 different directions at once. Frank appeared in the kitchen doorway, red-faced and furious, completely oblivious to the supernatural horror surrounding him. To him, the kitchen looked normal. Modern appliances, electric lights, no candles or glass jars full of human remains. "Richardson, what the hell is wrong with you? Mrs. Holloway is a sweet old lady, and you're in here acting like a lunatic." Frank grabbed Tom by the arm and hauled him to his feet. "Apologize to her right now, or you're fired." Tom looked around wildly. Frank was seeing something completely different, a normal elderly woman in a normal house. The illusion was perfect for those who didn't have Tom's sensitivity to the supernatural. "Frank," Tom gasped, "we have to get out of here. Now. The only place we're going is back to work, so you can explain to me why my best customer is threatening to sue us." Frank dragged Tom toward the front door, the creature's shrieks of fury following them. As they crossed the threshold, Tom felt the house's hold on him break, like stepping out of thick, poisonous air into clean wind. They made it to Frank's car before the boss started his tirade. "Richardson, I don't know what kind of drugs you're on, but this is the last straw. You're done. Pick up your final paycheck tomorrow, and don't bother asking for a reference." Tom sat in the passenger seat, still clutching the pizza box as Frank drove away from 1247 Elm Street. Through the rear window, he could see the house returning to its true appearance. Dark, decrepit, windows glowing with that same supernatural blue light. "You just fired me for trying to stay alive," Tom said quietly. "I fired you for being a liability," Frank snapped. "Good luck finding another job, college boy. Maybe next time you'll appreciate steady work." Frank dropped Tom off at his apartment complex and drove away without another word. Tom stood in the parking lot, unemployed and nearly broke, but still alive. For the moment, that felt like enough. The next morning, Tom sat in his apartment staring at his bank account balance. $73. Rent was due in 4 days. His student loan payment was already overdue. The electric company had left a final notice taped to his door. That evening, as Tom was updating his resume on his dying laptop and wondering if he should sell his car to make rent, he heard a knock at his door. When he opened it, No one was there, just a small envelope with his name written on it in careful handwriting. Inside was a bus token and a note. Tomorrow night, 11:30 p.m., corner of Elm and Riverside. Come alone. Time to end this. Tom spent the next day applying for jobs online and trying not to think about the note. But as evening approached, he found himself walking toward the bus stop. He couldn't explain why, but something deep inside him knew that running away wouldn't solve anything. The entity at 1247 Elm Street would keep feeding on other desperate delivery drivers until someone stopped it. At 11:25 p.m., Tom stood at the corner of Elm and Riverside, shivering in the October cold. The street was empty except for the occasional car passing by, and Tom was beginning to think he'd made a mistake when he heard footsteps behind him. "You came," said a familiar voice. Tom turned to see the man from before, dark hooded jacket, baseball cap, face hidden in shadows. But this time, Tom could see more of him. He was older than Tom had initially thought, with kind eyes and weathered hands that suggested someone who had worked hard his entire life. "I lost my job because of what happened at that house," Tom said. "I know," the man replied, "and I'm sorry, but sometimes we have to lose what we think we need in order to find what we actually need. Easy for you to say. You're not facing eviction." The man smiled sadly. "I've faced worse than eviction, son. I've faced the kind of darkness that lives in that house. And I'm here to help you understand that you have the power to stop it." "I don't understand any of this," Tom said, frustration and fear mixing in his voice. "Why me? Why that house? Why are you helping me?" "Because 23 years ago, I was just like you," the man said. "Desperate, broke, willing to take any job that paid. I delivered groceries to that same house, week after week, until the thing living there had drained so much of my life force that I was barely human anymore." Tom felt his blood run cold. "What happened?" "I became like the others you saw in that hallway, a slave feeding other victims to that creature so it could grow stronger. It took me 15 years to break free, and by then, I had helped it consume dozens of innocent people." The man reached into his jacket and pulled out the wooden cross Tom remembered from before. "This belonged to my grandfather. He gave it to me when I was about your age, told me it would protect me from the darkness in the world. I didn't believe him then. But you believe now." "I know now. The cross isn't magic, Tom. It's a symbol of faith, not necessarily religious faith, but faith in the idea that good can triumph over evil, that light can drive out darkness, that people like us have value beyond what others try to tell us we're worth." Tom took the cross, feeling its familiar weight in his palm. "What do I have to do?" "You have to go back to that house one more time. But this time, you go as someone who knows his own worth, someone who refuses to be afraid, someone who chooses courage over desperation." "And then what?" "Then you end this. You free the souls that creature has enslaved, and you make sure it never hurts anyone else." Tom looked down at the wooden cross, then back at the man. "Will you come with me?" The man shook his head. "This is something you have to do alone. But you won't really be alone. Every person who has ever chosen courage over fear, every soul who has ever stood up to darkness, will be with you." When Tom looked up again, the man was walking away, disappearing into the shadows between the streetlights. "Wait," Tom called after him. "What's your name?" The man paused and looked back. "Names aren't important. What's important is that you remember. You're worth more than any job, any paycheck, any security that requires you to compromise your soul." And then he was gone, leaving Tom standing alone on the corner with a wooden cross and a choice to make. The next night, Tom stood outside 1247 Elm Street for what he promised himself would be the last time. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't there because Frank had forced him. This time, he had chosen to come. He had no job to lose, no boss to please, no paycheck to protect. For the first time in months, Tom felt genuinely free. Free to make choices based on what was right rather than what was profitable. The house looked worse than ever. The yard was now completely overtaken by those strange spiral-growing plants, some of which seemed to be reaching toward him as he walked up the sidewalk. The porch light was strobing so rapidly it was almost seizure-inducing, and Tom could hear sounds coming from inside. Not just voices, but sounds like machinery grinding, like metal scraping against stone. Tom climbed the porch steps, feeling the wooden cross warm in his pocket. As he raised his hand to knock, the door swung open before his knuckles could touch the wood. "My dear, persistent pizza boy," came the familiar voice, but now it was layered, dozens of voices speaking in unison, creating a sound like a chorus from hell. "I wondered if you would come back. Most of them don't, once they lose their jobs." "I came back to end this," Tom said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. Laughter echoed from inside the house, not just from one throat, but from many. "End this? Oh, my sweet, naive boy, you have no idea what this is." The door opened wider, and Tom could see the hallway beyond. It was packed with figures, dozens of delivery drivers from different eras, all standing motionless with their black eyes fixed on him. Tom recognized some of the uniforms. Pizza places that had gone out of business years ago, grocery stores that had closed, food delivery services that had been replaced by newer apps. All of them thought they could end this too, the voice continued. All of them thought they were special, chosen, powerful. Now they serve me, and through them, I feed on hundreds more. Every delivery they make, every desperate soul they encounter, becomes part of my collection. Tom stepped across the threshold, but this time he felt no invisible hands pulling him. This time, he was choosing to enter. "I'm not like them," Tom said, walking down the hallway past the enslaved drivers. None of them moved to stop him, but he could feel their dead eyes tracking his progress. "Oh, but you are," the voice replied, seeming to come from the walls themselves now. "You're desperate, broke, willing to do anything for money. You're exactly like them." Tom reached the kitchen and found it transformed. It was larger now, big enough to hold all the enslaved delivery drivers who were filing in behind him. The wooden table had become an altar of sorts, covered with personal items, driver's licenses, credit cards, photos, wedding rings, all the things that had once defined the identities of the creature's victims. And standing before the altar was the entity itself, no longer bothering to maintain the illusion of being Mrs. Holloway. It was massive, at least 9 feet tall, with gray skin that hung in loose folds over a skeletal frame. Its face was a nightmare of multiple black eyes arranged in spirals, and its mouth stretched from ear to ear, revealing not just rows of sharp teeth, but smaller mouths within the larger one, each filled with their own sets of fangs. "Magnificent, isn't it?" the creature said, its many voices creating a sound like feedback from a broken speakers. "This is what I really am. This is what feeds on your desperation, your fear, your willingness to sacrifice your safety for a few dollars." The enslaved delivery drivers formed a circle around Tom, cutting off any escape route. But Tom didn't want to escape. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the wooden cross. The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with screaming wind. "A little piece of wood? That's your weapon against a force that has been feeding on human misery for over 2 centuries. "No," Tom said, holding the cross up so it caught the light from the supernatural candles that had appeared around the room. "This is just a reminder. A reminder of what? Tom took a deep breath, filling his lungs with air that tasted of rain and possibility. A reminder that I'm worth more than this, that I deserve respect, that I have the right to make choices based on what's right, not what's profitable. The creature's laughter faltered as Tom continued speaking, his voice growing stronger with each word. I'm worth more than a job that puts me in danger. I'm worth more than a boss who cares more about profit than safety. I'm worth more than an economy that treats people like disposable parts in a machine. Tom raised the wooden cross higher, and to his amazement, it began to glow with a soft, warm light. That's impossible, the creature hissed, stepping backward. You're nothing. A failed college graduate, a pizza delivery driver. I'm a human being, Tom said firmly. I'm someone who deserves dignity, safety, and the right to choose my own path. The light from the cross grew brighter, and Tom felt power flowing through him. Not magical power, but the power that comes from truly believing in your own worth. I choose not to be afraid, Tom continued, taking a step toward the creature. I choose not to accept abuse. I choose to believe that there's something better waiting for me than a job that requires me to risk my life. The creature shrieked as the light from the cross began to fill the room. The enslaved delivery drivers started to stir, their black eyes flickering as if they were waking up from a long sleep. You can't do this, the creature screamed. I own them. I own their desperation. I own their fear. You don't own anything, Tom said, and now his voice was echoing through the house with the same authority the creatures had possessed. Fear and desperation are choices, and I choose something different. Tom took the deepest breath of his life, filling his lungs not just with air, but with intention, with hope, with the absolute conviction that he deserved better than what he had been accepting. When he exhaled, the breath that left his lungs was visible as a stream of golden light that struck the creature in the center of its chest. Where the light touched, the gray skin began to dissolve like smoke. This is impossible, the creature wailed as its form started to collapse. You need me. You need the work. You need the money. I need my self-respect more, Tom replied, taking another breath and exhaling more light. The golden light spread throughout the room, touching each of the enslaved delivery drivers. As it reached them, their black eyes cleared, their faces regained color, and they began to look around in confusion and wonder. What happened to us? One of them asked, a young woman wearing a uniform from a Chinese restaurant that had closed 5 years earlier. How long have we been here? Asked another, a middle-aged man in a grocery store uniform. Tom continued to breathe out light until the creature was nothing but wisps of dark smoke that dissipated in the golden glow. With its destruction, the house around them began to change. The Victorian nightmare dissolved, revealing the truth. They were standing in an empty lot, surrounded by the foundations of a house that had been demolished years earlier. We're free, whispered one of the former slaves, a teenage boy wearing a pizza delivery uniform from the 1980s. As the golden light faded, Tom found himself standing alone in the empty lot. The other delivery drivers had vanished, finally able to move on to whatever waited for them beyond this world. Tom looked down at the wooden cross in his hand. It was just wood again, plain and simple, but it felt warm with the memory of what it had helped him accomplish. He walked back to his car and drove away from the empty lot that had once been 1247 Elm Street, knowing he would never need to return. Tom never went back to Gino's Pizza Palace. There was no point. Frank had already fired him, and Tom had no desire to explain what had happened at 1247 Elm Street to someone who cared more about profit margins than human lives. Instead, Tom spent the next week applying for jobs with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since college. He wasn't just looking for any work now. He was looking for work that treated employees with dignity, that valued safety over speed, that understood the difference between a job and a career. It took 3 weeks, but Tom eventually found a position with a nonprofit organization that helped connect underemployed college graduates with career development opportunities. The pay was modest, but the work was meaningful. And for the first time in years, Tom looked forward to going to work each day. 6 months later, Tom was helping other young people navigate the job market when he received an email from an address he didn't recognize. There was no message, just a single attachment, a security camera photo that appeared to have been taken outside 1247 Elm Street. The timestamp showed the night Tom had made his final visit to the house. The photo showed Tom standing in what looked like an empty lot, holding something in his raised hand. The wooden cross, though it was too small to make out clearly in the black and white image. But Tom wasn't alone in the photo. Standing beside him, barely visible in the grainy security footage, was the figure of a man in a dark hooded jacket and baseball cap. The figure was translucent, like a double exposure, and seemed to be watching Tom with what might have been pride. At the bottom of the photo, someone had written a single line of text. Sometimes the most important delivery we can make is the delivery of ourselves from the circumstances that keep us trapped. Tom stared at the photo for a long time, then printed it and put it in a frame on his desk. The wooden cross sat beside it, a reminder that sometimes the greatest battles we fight are the ones for our own self-worth. He never found out who sent the photo, and he never saw the Guardian again. But sometimes, late at night, when he was walking home from work, Tom would catch a glimpse of a figure in a dark jacket standing under a streetlight, watching over someone else who needed help finding their way. Tom would smile when he saw these glimpses, knowing that somewhere in the city, another person was about to learn that they were worth more than they had been told, that they had the power to choose their own path, and that sometimes quitting isn't giving up. It's the first step toward finding out what you're really worth. The empty lot where 1247 Elm Street had once stood was eventually developed into affordable housing for working families. Tom attended the groundbreaking ceremony and was surprised to see, among the crowd of city officials and community leaders, a familiar figure in a dark, hooded jacket and baseball cap. Their eyes met across the crowd, and the Guardian nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, of respect, of understanding between two people who had learned that the most important battles are the ones fought not with weapons, but with the simple, revolutionary act of believing in your own worth. Tom nodded back, and when he looked again, the Guardian was gone. But Tom knew he was still out there, somewhere in the city, watching over the desperate and the afraid, reminding them that they have more power than they know. And Tom kept the wooden cross on his desk, ready to pass it on to someone else who needed to remember that some deliveries should never be made, and that the most important thing you can deliver is yourself from the darkness that tries to convince you that you're worth less than you are.